Well, good morning, everybody. Oh, it's afternoon now. Good afternoon, everybody. Will Kirkman from Eco Merchant, a business that's now approaching 30 years of supplying natural and sustainable building materials. I have to declare right from the outset that Mark is a customer of ours, and we've been an advertiser with Jeff for quite a number of years, all surrounding sustainability, passive construction, etc. So I'm just going to ask Mark and Jeff if they could just quickly introduce themselves, and then we'll kick on. We've set ourselves broadly three questions relating to the topic that we're discussing today. And so I will ask the question and give the guys a few pointers to where I think some of the interesting parts are, things that we can discuss together, and then we'll open ourselves up for any questions later on. So Mark, would you be kind enough just to give us a quick few words on who you are and what you do?
Yes, thank you very much. So I run a small architectural practice based in Wiltshire, not far from Bath. I think I have been involved in what we call sustainable construction probably from the word go. It fits with my whole ethos and how I go about things. So the work of the practice is a mix. It's been largely within the education sector for quite a lot of that time, but it's always been with a view to what is sustainable construction and how can we best use our resources with good stewardship, good detailing, good thinking behind it. Really, just deepen what the thing looks like. So yeah, been going for since 1999. So yeah, getting quite old in the game.
Thank you, Mark. And Jeff?
Yeah, thanks, Will. So yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today. To Simon, and thanks everyone for attending. So I'm Jeff Colley. I am the editor and publisher of Passivhaus Plus magazine. I first started publishing a green building magazine, the janitor to Passivhaus Plus, in 2003. January 2003 was our first issue, and we've been in the UK since 2012. We rebranded and shifted the focus slightly of the magazine in 2012 to Passivhaus, a focus on Passivhaus, not exclusively Passivhaus, but a Passivhaus focus, because we'd learned over time through publishing articles on a bunch of attempts at low energy building and green building that lots of the strategies that people were trying to devise weren't working in one way or another. They were using more energy than expected. They were causing discomfort. They were running into problems, whether it was overheating, whether it was in the summer, whether they were suffering from mold problems or poor indoor air quality, and so on. So not that Passivhaus is the only thing that works, but it's been proven reliably to be a safe pair of hands and a safe standard. So that we felt was a good direction to take people in terms of a fail-safe, a simple way to approach things. I also have a consultancy recently that I've set up on strategy and communications and data analysis called Zero Ambitions Partners, which is linked to a podcast of the same name, Zero Ambitions, and I chair the Heat Pump Association of Ireland for fun as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, so let's get straight on with it because we've not got a lot of time. The first question we asked ourselves, or that was asked between the group with Simon, was, is it worth adopting Passivhaus principles? And I mean, I think, as I just said to all of them before, the answer probably is just a simple yes, but let's get a bit more nuanced about it. I think if I could ask Mark and Jeff, for both of you to come back and sort of, pick any of these where I've just made a few comments to myself about why it would be worth it. But one of the things we come across is breaking habitual choices and existing practice. So there is a resistance to change in the market. The other one is, I suppose, might be described as loss aversion, where people tend to avoid losses more than they accept gains. So there is definitely this at play, a loss aversion sort of play going on within the market. The other thing which I suppose counters that, which you might want to talk about, is the fact that Passivhaus principles do provide very compelling metrics. You get good measurements out of a building. The process itself lends itself towards recording and measuring buildings, which is definitely missing elsewhere. I suppose the last two would be social proof. In other words, case studies and what other people are doing. Can we lead by exemplar? And then the last one is that we come across quite a lot at Eco Merchant is framing health and comfort as priority outcomes. We quite often say there are four broad segments in constructing a building. You've got location, you've got shape, you've got performance, and you've got health. And if you look at the way the regulations, the minimum compliance you've got to afford yourself with that when you're building a building, the majority of the regulation is weighted towards the first two, and yet the main outcomes that are experienced by the occupier are the last two. So anyway, so there we go. I mean, that was the question. Is it worth adopting passive house principles? I'm going to ask Jeff to go first, seeing as what you've just said about the history of the magazine and your commitment to passive house.
Yeah, I think it's first of all really important to clarify what you mean by passive house principles, because it's a term that gets once you stop short of full-on certification to the standard, and we're not saying that everybody should be certified to the standard. The term gets abused a lot, and people confuse passive house with passive solar house and so on. And that's less of an issue, I think, than it has been in the past. But a lot of the time when people talk about passive house, they talk in terms of 4 or 5 key principles: insulation, air tightness, triple glazing, and heat recovery, ventilation, and thermal bridging. But there's another one which gets missed a lot of the time, which is essential, and it's quality assurance. So and finicky.
Jeff, we've got a problem with your connection.
Might be worth asking Mark.
Mark, do you want to pick up on that one, and then we'll see if we can recover Jeff?
Yes, I mean, where Jeff left it, I think is a good point. I think it's that quality assurance side of stuff. I mean, to me, passive house means something
like a Dropbox folder or something like that with hundreds, if not thousands, of
He's back.
Showing,
Jeff,
showing.
Sorry to interrupt. We lost you there for about. I mean, you just got onto the quality assurance, and then you froze.
Yeah, and I completely agree as an interruption to say I completely agree on the quality assurance side of things. I think it's a reliable standard, unlike some of the other things that we may talk about. But you can rely on it, and I think that's great.
So are we then saying that if it's worth adopting passive house principles, notwithstanding that there might be some discussion about what a principle actually is that one of the benefits is the quality assurance, is the fact that it is a measured and controlled process?
Yeah, absolutely.
Would the inference then be that building to building regs is not a quality assured and highly managed process?
Well, and yes, not to anything like the same extent.
Okay,
and even if you are thinking about, even if it were being adhered to fully, it has different priorities. It has lower ambitions in terms of for instance, the parameters you're assuming that the occupant will be living in. SAP assumes 21 degrees in the living area and 18 degrees in the rest of the house, right? In a typical house in Ireland, at least, I'm sure it's similar in the UK. About 20% or so of the living area of the house, of the total area of the house indoors, will be treated as kind of living space. So that translates to an average of about 18.6 degrees. That's the assumed temperature, but it's only assuming you're hitting those temperatures for 9 hours a day, Monday to Friday, and 16 hours a day at the weekend, right? So it's based on an old BRE model from the 80s, which does not reflect how homes are used and the higher expectations of comfort that people have when you tell them you're giving them a low energy building, right? So if people are working from home, or if they're looking after kids, or if they've got young kids or elderly people or whatever in the house, they're going to be looking to have higher comfort, and they're going to be looking to have higher comfort for much more of the day. So baking in comfort, baking in that from the start is really important, because otherwise you're going to get comfort taking, and you're going to get people being unhappy with why their A-rated home is performing more like a C-rated or a D-rated.
Yeah, I mean that's why I mentioned at the beginning that actually when we talk to our customers, quite a lot of it is framed around comfort and occupant health as a priority outcome. Mark, do you want to add anything to that? from your experience with delivering passive builds?
Yeah, there was something that was going through my mind then. You know, I've lost the train of the thought of it. I mean, I'm going back to the I think it was a talk I went to very recently by Jay Cottrell, who wrote the Passive House Handbook, is obviously very involved, and I'm working with her where they're providing a frame from Passive House Homes Limited. But she gave a very interesting talk slideshow that was basically suggesting that this where we are with building regs and is the big missing gap between, you know, the installation levels, all the rest is coming together, but the big gap is airtightness in buildings, and that's really the difference. So why, you know, passive house gives you this assurance on reaching a particular standard. It's a good measure. It's simple to achieve. It's, to my mind, you know, why not? Is when I'm looking at something, it's an easy to understand. I've got so much else to think about on designing a building beyond many things. To my mind, it's a logical way for us to think and build. I think.
I suppose this begs another question, which we come across quite a lot, which is all of these. I mean, if we're trying to get people to look at passive house principles as a way of building, I mean, we apply quite a lot of. I mean, I'm a big fan of looking at biases in the way which we read information to our business, and one of them is the survivorship bias, which essentially, as far as we're concerned, means I'm more interested in people who are not doing this than the ones that are doing it. And I do sometimes worry that that the talk is so technical and is so inward looking that it's difficult to attract people in from the outside. There's an old joke, isn't there, that the most common place to see advertising for railway transport is at a railway station. You're already going on the bloody train. You know, why don't you put railway advertising in bus shelters and supermarkets, etc.? And I think there's some of this is, you know, we do find ourselves explaining from first principles why building better would be a good idea. I don't need to do that to people who are already doing it. In fact, as a merchant, I absolutely love it when people ring up and said, I'd like this product, this product, this product. When can I have it? How much is it? And I just sell them the stuff. You know, our conversations are completely different. And I suppose, Jeff, part of the answer is do you find that many people who are not passive converts or aware of passive principles read your magazine, do you think? I mean, are you bringing in new people into the market?
Yeah. Like we've always, with the mag, we would circulate the mag to people whether they like it or not, to some extent. So you know, we've always, because we're I guess I wouldn't use the word evangelist because I don't like the connotation. You know, we have an agenda. We're trying to convince people to do better with buildings. So we will be sending the magazine out to architects, for instance, and kind of significant clients uh, who have the ability to kind of move the needle on this stuff. And I just think that you're right. We need to focus on benefits. If we just focus on the technical or on the you must do better kind of arguments that, you know, the risk is, or if you just focus on problems, you risk losing people. I kind of like to think about making this like when we started our magazine in the, you know, in the UK, we had a choice over which spelling of passive house to go for, even whether we go for the German spelling or the English. We were looking, this is 2012, at some of the early Brexit opinion polls, you know, and I thought, well, we could go the German spelling, but we'd alienate the Faragistas out there and so on, you know, and I don't want to alienate them. I don't see the reason to.
It's a tricky line, isn't it?
I want even foaming at the mouth climate change deniers to be wanting to build these homes because they're better buildings. You know, if you can do that, you can show people that doing good things, you know, high performance, sustainable buildings. You can frame this in a way that, why wouldn't you want to live in a building like this?
I think that's a really good point. I think if you look by the number of views of articles on our website, there's an article on our website called "The Worst Building You Can Build by Law," and all it does is it reframes the question. So what we're saying to people is if we described a house you just bought off a developer which is just building regs compliant, you've actually just bought the worst house you can buy by law. And the first question that tends to come back is, why don't people do better if this is the entry level standard? Why is that not something we do? It applies across all sorts of other things that we buy, whether it's a phone or a car or anything else. We apply these principles. You assume there to be minimum standards which are there. That's why, for example, you have PAT testing for electrics and you have MOTs for cars, and there's a minimum level of standard. And people get very used to it. If you were buying a new car now and it didn't have like a touchscreen TV on it and reversing camera sensors and all the rest of it, you'd think you're being diddled. And yet we do this with building. I'm going to move on to the second question because I think these lead to, and time is stripping away. But the second question we wanted to ask ourselves was, are sustainable materials a necessity when constructing energy efficient buildings? And yet again, I've just made a couple of notes about this. And I think one of the things I'm thinking about is I've mentioned this before to you guys, is are you the kind of person who'd be happy to go into McDonald's and order the veggie burger? Yeah. And what I mean by that is if you're building a building and you're specifying, wood fiber insulation and etc., does that not lead you to wanting to take that mentality and thinking through the process? I mean, we mentioned before, yes, if you're insulating under a slab, you might want to be using PIR. If you're interested in insulating in a block cavity, and you may use good quality double glazing rather than triple. But one of the things that intrigues me about this is that to some extent, energy efficiency has got nothing to do with natural materials. You can achieve it in any way you want. But once you decided that you might want to use natural materials, surely that would infect the whole process all the way through. That if we therefore sell wood fiber insulation to someone or sheet soil insulation, then it's a reasonable punt that they might be interested in timber, triple glazed timber windows or air tightness materials or various other products. So that kind of commitment, consistency, etc. I think the other thing that comes to play in here is trust and transparency. I think there's a greater degree of trust and transparency amongst some of the providers of natural materials than there are those of synthetic, especially when it comes to things like paints, oddly enough. And then I think the last one that I've got down here really is I think also people, would I be right in suggesting or saying, because this is our experience, that people who are specifying and using natural materials tend to have a long-term approach to building and for the building's outcomes, even if they're not going to live in it or own it themselves. They feel responsible. And that for that long-term thinking, that durability, performance, and the outcomes being beneficial to the occupants is part of their thinking. So I'll just go back and ask, I'll come to you, Mark, on this one first. So, I mean, I'm kind of asking, I'm asking the wrong question to the wrong person, because I know exactly what your answer will be in broad terms. But why are you, let's just rephrase it, why are you making natural materials a necessity when you're considering energy efficiency rather than synthetic materials?
I think that there are several answers to that, but I think it's the quality of the environment, the breathability, the whole way that building structure, when it's put together as a composite of materials, works, lives, breathes, and the quality of the environment you create with it, I think is incredibly important. And it's something that's very hard to put down on a piece of paper. But I can still remember, we all know that walking into a house that's been freshly painted with some horrific chemical, and you can smell the paint for days, or the synthetic carpets in the sunshine giving off stuff. We all kind of, we get used to it. Or your car, even your brand new car, as I've got at the moment, absolutely stinks of the chemical residue left over from its manufacture. And we, for many times we just say, oh, nasty smell, get used to that. Actually, for many people, these things are a problem. And I think much of us and much of life goes on having assumed that there is no real problem, but actually for some there's a real resistance, a real problem with VOCs in the air or chemicals or residues, and we're only just discovering how low traces of stuff are a problem. So that long-term thinking, long-term about what it is we're building and what we're building with, I think is absolutely vital.
Is that more prevalent with client engagement rather than contractor or architect engagement? That kind of, I would imagine there's probably, if you're a client and you want it to be natural, whereas an architect or a contractor may think, well, actually, I can use this because it's cheaper,
absolutely.
quicker, or I can get it, in a more straightforward way.
Yeah, absolutely. And the contractor will, you do all your best as you can as an architect. I'm sitting in a room with someone who's done exactly the same. You've specified all these materials as you should do, and the contractor comes along to the client and says, "Well, I've just made you 10 grand saving because I've put this in instead of that, and I've used concrete blocks instead of this, or I've used that," and it completely undermines the whole philosophy with the way you're designing. And the client says, "Well, that's good. I can make what do they do with that money?" It's the integrity of it, I think, and yeah, working close with the architect, working closely and getting the client to understand why you're selecting these materials, I think is vital in the architect's role.
Communicating the reason and positioning. Jeff, I wanted to ask you this question as well, because this is a discussion you and I have had many times, which is, and I've had it with Passive House Institute as well, which is the role of natural materials in Passive House, because it's kind of self-evident that if you're going to mitigate operational energy, then what you're left with, all the potential to pollute, is actually concentrated in the fabric of the building. And therefore, not having some kind of approach where that is mitigated is kind of unforgivable, really. If you've saved all this energy, but you built the stuff out of nuclear waste, plastic, and chemical. So, yeah. I mean, where is the Passive House sector and Passive House in the UK on that journey for appreciating and recognizing the benefits of delivering Passive House with sustainable materials as opposed to whatever will do the job? Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think when you bear in mind the Passive House in the UK is still in its it's still among it's being delivered by and for mainly enthusiasts, right? So like
you're making it sound
like
very
us,
Anoraki.
Right? Yeah, it is. Yeah, and that those people, people who are that interested in energy performance and comfort and so on, are also quite likely to be interested in materials and in broader sustainability. So if you were to draw a Venn diagram of people, who are really interested in Passive House and people who are interested in natural materials and so on, it would look a lot like a circle, right? But that doesn't necessarily hold as the standard starts to grow. It may start to, because you can, as you say, build it out of anything. The standard is agnostic in that regard. I'd also say it's really important to specificity, if that's the word. God, that was difficult. Ambitious, try and say that matters.
We'll adopt it as a word if it's not.
So that's specificity really matters when you're talking about terms like natural materials. There is I kind of recoil a little bit. I mean, you need shorthand terms, but like asbestos is a naturally occurring element, right? No one wants to build with that. Okay, so it's shorthand terms are really useful, but we need to get more specific and look at the actual inherent properties to a material. Treat each material separately and look at how they can work. But in the main, we should be building with natural materials and with less processed, lower impact materials for sure.
And the carbon side of it as well comes into play, surely, because I mean, okay, so embodied energy, embodied carbon, but I mean, I think one of the other things that we find, which is a reasonably straightforward route to market for products, is that there are certain products that we have that just simply outperform any synthetic alternative. And if you're looking, for example, to control heat movement through a building, then dense natural materials offer decrement delay, where lighter materials, synthetic materials with a maybe a slightly better U value, do not. So it's about when architects look at buildings and they specify for an outcome, then that's when compromising a specification becomes really problematic. So if you take out the wood fiber and replace it with mineral wool, and you drop the decrement delay from 12 hours to 8, you've got a problem if that's a habitable space under the roof. The same goes, as Mark was just saying, about breathability. So I think
and that's a subject that's often misunderstood.
Which is important. Sorry, Jeff.
Well, that's a subject that's often misunderstood. I'd like to think people have moved on along well enough now to have a firm grasp of that, because that old chestnut of how breathability versus airtightness, and the idea that they're
What,
the
the red
false
herring?
idea that they're, yeah, exactly. I mean, so I would always I want to try and put a flag down in the ground for the term really should be sweatability. It sounds a bit grosser, but it's a much more accurate reflection of what we're talking
I,
about. When we talk about breathability, we're talking about moisture, not air.
well, I think that in itself is a really good point, but it also goes back to the sort of hermetic argument about resistance to passive house, which people think that you're building a house out of Tupperware and it's going to be a sweat box. So yeah. Anyway, one for. So I think that
Actually,
in terms of sorry, Simon.
As well, just because we've got a couple of questions from the guys in the room, and I mean, I think they've covered them in part, but Richard was asking Jeff, do any of the high spec materials used with passive house affect living conditions with the emission of VOCs?
So, so I just to unpick that question. You can build passive houses out of anything, and the kind of products that are specifically tailored for passive houses, I don't think are any different from in terms of VOCs and the likes uh, from really any other products in that regard. I think the thing to bear in mind here, indoor air quality, it's about two things really. It's about dilution and source control, right? So source control is about things like VOCs, stopping the nasties from getting into the building in the first instance, and they can come from a bunch of different sources. Some of which might surprise you, get weird kind of chemical reactions, even with some natural materials in some cases too. Um, so source control is important with all materials. Irrespective of whether you're building passive house or not. The assumption then sometimes that some people make is that when you're building an airtight building, you have more of an issue with VOCs, and that can be the case potentially if you don't have a proper ventilation strategy. The problem is that the standard way of doing things is not to build things particularly airtight, but to have no proper fit for purpose ventilation strategy. Now, if you have either a poorly designed mechanical system or standard hit and miss ventilation, you will get long spells of the year at times where you get effectively next to no ventilation because the prevailing weather. What you have with passive house is a system that's designed to stop unintended air leakage through building the building properly. And then you have a purpose-provided ventilation system that is going to deliver a consistent number of air changes to shift any pollutants that do get into the building all the time at a predictable rate. And that is essential. When we look at the post-occupancy data on passive houses, whatever they're built from, they tend to do pretty well. We would still always prefer people to use natural materials, of course, for a bunch of reasons, be it moisture, be it embodied carbon, and be it potentially health. But I think it's a far lower risk, frankly. I would say that a passive house is a lower risk than a standard building, in fact, in that regard, because of the ventilation strategy.
I'd go along with that as well. Simon. And I mean, the one glaring one that we come across, we don't sell furnishings and we don't sell worktops and the like. The one glaring one we come across all the time is paints and finishes, and the labeling is a nightmare. You see the little globe on paint cans. That is a voluntary scheme, and there is no requirement for anybody to declare anything in order to do that. It's a self-assessed badge. So the whole of the paint scenario is a minefield in terms of off-gassing, and there are lots and lots of things that we encounter and we learn about. So although most people would associate VOCs with a smell, they don't always create a smell, and VOCs can actually carry on being off-gassed for years, not just weeks. And even if the smell is gone, it doesn't mean to say the VOCs. So with a lot of these things, one thing I would say is if you've got a material that will do the job as well as or better than the synthetic material, then apply the prophylactic principle and use that instead, would be the simple advice. I mean, it's just a matter of mitigating risk. There is less risk using certain materials than there is using others. And if you don't know, by the way, transparency is always key. Another problem with paint, which is transparency, is looking at the ingredients. And by the way, even if they are transparent, do you actually understand what you're reading?
Yeah.
So I think that, look for full declarations, look for all the supporting literature that you need in order to assess what the product is made from, how it performs. Look at its waste category, see how it's disposed of, for example, and have a look. But apply the precautionary principle and wherever you can would be my advice to a customer of ours.
I would say as well within that. Sorry for I'll stop shouting on now.
Don't worry about
it. No, it's really important to contextualize all this as well. So there's an academic called Dr. Ben Jones at the University of Nottingham who's just completed some fascinating research on a sort of a harm index for buildings, looking at the pollutants of most concern. And by far and away the leading one from his research. This is based on how harmful a pollutant is and how prevalent it's likely to be in buildings. And if a pollutant is harmful but it's not really occurring in buildings, then it's not on this index. And if it's prevalent in buildings but not very harmful, it's low down in the index. By far and away, the top one is PM 2.5, which is particulate matter 2.5. These are small particulates that you get when typically from burning things. So and that could be from an exhaust pipe. It could be from a boiler. It could be from a stove. I know a lot of people love fires and stoves. Burning wood fuel is a really bad idea. Generally, I would say, people have these romantic notions of it, and I love a flame as much as anyone else. But that is really problematic. Burning, a gas stove or whatever is also really problematic. So getting away from setting things on fire to make food safe to eat or making a place safe to live in, habitable. Burning things in the place that you spend 90% of your time with a limited volume of air and so on is not a good idea. And so there's things like that need to be part of the consideration as well.
Okay, so I'm just minded of the time. Simon, was there another question you wanted us to pick up now, or?
You're muted,
Simon, you've muted yourself.
Will, can I come back to you?
Yeah. Well, Simon, sorry, you were muted, Simon. Mark just wants to pop in and say something.
Right.
Yeah. All I was going to say was on the paint one is I think the consideration, certainly from a specification point of view, apart from the fact that much of the paints that are easily available create a PVC, a plastic coat within the building, so you're negating the point of having used all the expensive natural materials you've already put into the building for its sweatability or breathability, whatever you like to call it. But the other issue, which I know is an issue, is the volume of waste material that's created by that paint manufacture in the first point. That there's a large tonnage or volume of material that's created when you make a synthetic paint that has to find its way into the environment. It's not reused as anything. It's another waste product. Whereas the more natural, there are ways of making products that go on the walls that doesn't involve that. And you have to consider when you're putting this stuff on the wall, how much did you create in creating that building that's now gone out into the environment somewhere?
I agree.
As a result of your act.
This is about looking at the waste codes. I mean, it is the way you build as well. We have a business called We Build Eco, which Jeff has seen, which you know about. And one of the things that we have, the most common points of feedback is that buildings can get built without any skips, or only one skip for the whole build. It constantly amazes me. I've got endless pictures on my mobile phone of skips full of PIR waste. Yeah. I mean, anyway, waste is another area, but yes, also, I mean, it ties into this because actually sustainable materials are not a necessity, but it is, generally speaking, by far and away, a less risky, more environmentally sympathetic way of building than using synthetic materials. Maybe just try and limit those to only where you need them, or where they're the only answer that you've got. I'd like us to move on to the last question. And again, I've made a couple of notes on this, but this was a question Simon asked actually when we were discussing this podcast: how to disrupt the stranglehold of the current market leaders, which kind of has some inferences in it. I suppose negative inferences was that stranglehold would infer that they've got you. They're denying you choice. They're denying you the ability to change and move and adapt, and also it limits you to their ambitions. And I suppose that's probably one of the comments that I made about the choice architecture of this, and that is that the word stranglehold is there for a reason, because it carries those implications. So how do we break that, and how do we look at it? And I think really, just to kick it off, one thing I would say is that we have a view at Eco Merchant of looking things in a particular way. So the way we describe it, the way that we describe it in our business is that we have a shelf backwards rather than a factory forward approach. So if you're just imagine if you're in a factory making a product, then everything begins to look linear. So the processes, the production costs, you've got everything is consolidated and aggregated. And then when that exits the factory, it tends to go through the finance director and the senior team who are working on aggregated data, and they projected it out. So quite often the sort of presumption is if we make enough of this and we make it cheap enough, it'll be really popular. Okay. Now the issue with all of that is it's wrong. Okay. It doesn't deal with real life. If on the other hand, you look from the shelf back, then you're saying, why would I buy this? What is it for? How would I use it? What do I know about it? And what can I find out about it? That's going to inform my decision. Now, that's the way Eco Merchant think. We tend to have a shelf backwards thinking position rather than a factory forward. The problem we've got, of course, is we deal with factory forward purchasing because that's what we buy. We buy materials from people who always want us to buy their materials and buy this because it's better or it's cheaper or you'll sell more or whatever. On the other hand, we're talking to customers when we present them, which is our job with a range of products. They want to look at it and go, well, how does this benefit what I'm doing? How does it fit in with me? Does it give me the benefits that I want? So the question I really want to ask you two is how do you experience this stranglehold? And is it necessarily bad? And how would you encourage smaller distributors or smaller players in the market, seeing as stranglehold has the implication of size? How do we look at it? Because I think that this is the route by which we can get better uptake and better building. And then the last addendum to this, I suppose, is a simple one. It's just if they have got a stranglehold, how do you get them to innovate and supply in a manner that suits what the shelf backward thinker wants rather than the factory forward thinker wants? I don't know which one of you wants to have a pop at this dilemma first, but Mark, obviously you want to go. Try it.
I'll go, but it won't, probably I'm not going to answer the question so directly, but I'm just an observation from my own recent experience, trying to do eco-renovate, if you like, retrofits a house, which I'm not doing to passivhaus standards, but because of various principles in it, I've been using natural materials to insulate and to construct. And I have to reflect that much of the building work that goes on in the UK probably doesn't always involve an architect, or if it does, it gets up to planning stage and a builder will come along and take over, and he'll go to the local builder's merchant and purchase whatever he can get, and he will change that spec and will get whatever he can. And I think it's the lack of education both with builders and what's available at your local builder's merchant that's going to dictate so much of what goes into items, albeit whatever you've specified.
Is that not part of the stranglehold thing? As there are really basically
yes,
four. If you think about insulation supply, you've probably got 3 or 4 really big suppliers. In the merchant world, you've probably got 3 or 4. They operate under different brands, but it's the same 3 or 4 companies that boss most of the market, and that's what you're seeing. I mean, it's an odd thing. I will mention this. 2 of our biggest customers are actually other merchants.
That's interesting,
and they're nationals.
Yeah.
And so that they are bumping into demand on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But if you've got 800 branches, you only need 1 person a week in 10 branches, and you've got reasonable demand.
Yeah. But certainly for me, as a purchaser, as opposed to an architect who's got a knowledge of it, trying to get hold of the materials that I know you supply from a local builder's merchant, and knowing that there's a direct relationship where I can cut down on that cost of having to buy a whole pallet of something from somewhere, but I can work with a local merchant. And I think more of that and more understanding is really useful to make sure that Joe Blogs on the street who really wants to be green, but his builder tells him he can't because he can't get it. I think there's something there that needs to be addressed, I think.
Well, I think that may well be the case. And so, Jeff, do you want to? I mean, you carry advertisers in your magazine, not a great many, but you do carry them, and you focus on products on all your case studies.
Yeah, and we tend to be pretty picky about what who will advertise in the magazine. Where well, you know, they're not all mom and pop cuddly companies, and they probably shouldn't be either if we want this to be scalable. But we do, you know, we have some basics to sort of standards we try to adhere to, and to ensure that we're promoting kind of reliable companies. But on this issue, um, I think the first thing I'd say is that it's incumbent on the industry and the specifiers and designers and so on to educate themselves as much as possible. Because a lot of the products that are being offered in the mainstream are not necessarily fit for purpose when it comes to low energy building, particularly when it comes to retrofit and to you know solid wall masonry buildings, for instance. So I am delighted to see as a little possible sign of change in Ireland as way of example that the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland um, has just announced a pilot phase of our national retrofit scheme. We have these one-stop shops that have been created to enable retrofits to be done, you know, managed by these entities for to make the process simpler for people. And this pilot one-stop shop is specifically focused on traditional buildings. And in the small print of the announcement on it, they've effectively conceded that the certifications for the existing certifications, in other words, Agromont certifications for that they have required for retrofits, are a problem in this market, because basically none of the products that are Agromont certified for use in retrofit are really appropriate for traditional buildings, for solid wall buildings, for instance, in terms of insulation materials and so on. And none of the products that are appropriate have Agromont certs. So you have to look at alternatives. So what they've done in this case is published a list of accredited professionals, conservation architects and surveyors and engineers, who people should go to. Part of it as well, and this is essential, is that we have much better understanding and literacy in the industry of what building regulations actually require. Certifications like Agromont gain this kind of quasi regulatory status, which they actually don't deserve. You do not need an Agromont certificate for a product to enable it to be utilized in a building. Their values sometimes can be useful, sometimes can be quite limited. Some of the certs can contain entirely you know, pseudo-scientific nonsense in them at case in stages as well.
Are you suggesting, Jeff, that there's a tick box mentality about this kind of specification? EPD tick, BBA tick, etc., and that people will therefore not go and do their research?
Yeah, exactly. And you know, it is harder. What the alternative I'm talking about is harder because it requires building designers, for instance, to really know their stuff. But you need to anyway, I would say, because you know, ultimately, if you know, like there's some research published recently in Ireland on external insulation systems. We'd be big advocates of external insulation as an approach, and every cert that was on the market in Ireland, and virtually all of them, their Agromont certs, were not compliant with BS 5250, the British standard that deals with sort of how you assess moisture, interstitial condensation risk, and so on. Now, the certification body absolutely should have known that. But they didn't, and they let the certification go through. So where does that leave the specifier or the homeowner at the end of the day if there's a problem? You know,
well, especially in a society where the whole of the industry is geared around finding someone to blame. I mean, you know, I think the other thing is, of course, is one thing I find with the big companies, the stranglehold companies, is that just to lapse into the vernacular, I meet so many people whose principal job is covering their own arse. Yeah. You know, so the defensible position. So I mean, you know, but I agree. I mean, I think if products are transparently described and people are honest about them, then the majority of building specifiers, designers, and architects will be able to assess whether the product with the other things it's using in this building section will do the job or not. I mean, after all, you have to assess it for heat transfer and various other things. So why on earth can't you make that? I mean, I suppose there may be an exception when it comes to fire, Okay, but I think in terms of the performance of a building, I would agree with you. I think that this is so, but I think that this is where the stranglehold comes, doesn't it? Because there are companies that we buy product from who will spend more on a golf day than some of our other suppliers will spend on a whole year's marketing. That if they need a fire certificate, if they need a new test for this, that, and the other, they just pay for it and it's done. It's not a problem. And yet someone developing new products, and we're tracking lots of them, everything from sort of mycelium right the way through to different hemp products to all sorts of things. We're looking at introducing 2 new cork products shortly. All the providers, although they're big enough companies, they do not have the budget that the stranglehold companies do. So that we are already massively inconvenienced when it comes to coming to market. And the other thing is that the market then expects you to have all of this. The entry level to get a new product into the market is so expensive. I was talking to a company that we worked closely for many years who were developing a hemp product. And they were looking at a bill of something in the region of £200,000 to go through all the testing for their wall system. Yeah. And it's whereas an incumbent can make any changes they want to their existing wall system for pence, and by comparison, and it's just there seems to be an unnecessarily high standard to break in, the bar that you have to clear.
So
I think that would be fair.
On that, Will. Yeah, sorry. I was just bringing in Alex because Alex has made a point, and when you actually, Jeff, you've alluded to the fact that you don't see a problem necessarily with some of the big guys getting involved. So Alex was saying, is there an issue that's Kingspan have taken a majority share in Styco? I'm assuming that's bearing in mind they have less barriers to entry. If the big guys come in and start buying up natural building material companies, then that's a route to market. Because on Mark's point, as a homeowner, architects aren't used throughout the life of a project. They may be used to draw the plans up and get them to planning, and then it's down to the contractor. And contractors, as we discussed, they're just interested in saving money and what have you. And then a homeowner just goes down to Selco and just sees this massive warehouse and think, I need to get this, and doesn't even think about what they're buying. So most people aren't even exposed to the types of things that you guys are talking about, because we're all talking to each other, but it's the end homeowner is not hearing any of this. So if the bigger guys are getting involved, then that is a way that the market is being provided with better materials, maybe.
This is the cognitive dissonance question, isn't it? Which is where this is this is the vegetarian burger at McDonald's. This is the vegetarian sausage from the butcher. And I think the answer is that it's a double-edged sword. I mean, there are some inherent problems with this that I think that some of the bigger companies that have taken over. I mean, don't forget as well that Suprema took over Pavatex. And there are lots of alliances and associations within businesses that may not suit your moral outlook on life. You might not even know about. The ownership of banks, financial institutions, your pensions. It's across the board. So I'm not too concerned, but I'm concerned more about behaviour than I am about necessarily about some of the reputational baggage that comes with it. But I think one of the things that we see and we do point this out to people, is we've had these arguments and discussions. I say arguments because they were about the idea that you can grow a market, for example, by simply slashing the price, which is utter nonsense. And I think the issue here is about combining what we've been talking about today. So the one thing we look for when we're dealing with a large parent company is a degree of autonomy, which allows the brands that they've got some influence over now to maintain some degree of integrity in terms of what it does. Obviously, it's inherent. If you make things from wood, it's less of a damaging process than making things from petrochemical. But what I say to them really, and what we're looking at here is just supposing you took the most popular wood fiber product, which is a flexible bat, all the manufacturers make it, and you slash the price to the same price as mineral wool. Okay, it's not a massive drop, but it's a drop nonetheless. Would you then have, let's just say, 20% of the market? And the answer is no, you wouldn't. And so the way to do this is through exactly what we've been talking about today, which is encouraging more people for the reasons that you can identify, resell, and people can benefit from. That's how you grow the market. And it's all of these kind of things. If you apply price mentality to this, you will fail. All you'll do is put yourself out of business. So unfortunately, Simon, I wouldn't see Selco and Travis and Jewson's, etc., stocking natural materials widely. They've all tried it before and they've all failed. And the way I describe this to people, which kind of helps, is it's what we call the skew point. It's a merchanting thing. So if you have a vertical and horizontal axis with price and volume, you can plot a point on that graph when somebody will be interested in buying it. In other words, if I buy it, if I can sell it at this price, I've got to buy this quantity. Okay. Now compound that with the number of locations you have, and you can find a point. All merchants will find a product point for any product on that skew curve. That box below that point is where, generally speaking, the market for independents, people like us, exists, because you can take your demand across your whole area. You can aggregate it and send it to one point, and they'll fulfill it on your behalf. Because this is why, I mean, I'll name them. Travis Perkins is one of our biggest customers. Okay, where do you put the stock? Yeah, so you put it in Northampton, then you get inquiry for 5 packs from Truro and another one from Durham. So what this is about, there's more to this at stake. So what will happen is that at the moment, the current setup within the UK market is more than capable with dealing pretty much any increase in demand, until it reaches that skew point, and then it will become widely available. But I think we are years off that, if I'm honest, years and years off that. So it's about moving that skew point effectively. It's about filling that box up, is where we're at. That's where our market is at the moment. And that
I'd add one point here, Will, which is there's something. So sometimes the market kind of conditions change, so you can have new parameters that skew everything. And one of the things that is starting to happen is there's a shift towards, and it's great to see, whole life carbon calculation and this draft pilot, net zero carbon building standard and so on. So we are seeing in Ireland, for instance, we're starting to see some of the biggest developers in the country starting to engage properly with things like passivhaus and with net biodiversity gain, and starting to get moving on whole life carbon calculation too, and to look at what quick wins they can implement. That's exciting, and it's about bloody time, but it's also fraught with risk, because you'll end up with people who are new to this, whose imperatives are different, who are being required to meet certain targets, and the risk is that they abstract a particular target, like embodied carbon or whatever it might be, from the quality of building, and from a real understanding of what the appropriate ways are to build. So. I don't know what the answer is in that regard, other than just more people becoming more engaged and more educated, and more shouty about it.
There is an argument to be made that says that data is the enemy of marketing on this, because we have speed limits, okay, but the majority of people drive with one ambition: not getting caught. And whether it's 32 in a 30-mile-an-hour zone, or they weren't paying attention, or they're doing 80 on the motorway, they're still breaking that. There's a law about speeding. We had a financial crisis because smart people worked out how to beat the regulations and the guidance that they've been set. So my view would be, I would rather persuade people to build better and let them, and make it easy for them to do so, because I think regulating people always allows for the shenanigans you've just described. And the other thing is just look at carbon accounting at the moment. How complicated is that? It's making tax look simple. Yeah, there's a whole industry set up about carbon. Okay, and a lot of the people that we encounter are. I remember being it was an ASBP conference, and there was somebody, the usual kind of graphs and forms and tables and everything else. And I was sitting there thinking, I am not getting any of this. And there was a couple of guys next to me who I knew were architects. And I said, can you just explain this to me? I'm kind of a bit lost here. And they looked at me and went, no, we can't. Yeah. So this happens. I think just on a very simple sort of, human nature note, one of the other things we notice as well when we're trying to persuade people to at least look at something is that what might be relatively straightforward to you can be absolutely scary to someone else, and they can be too embarrassed to ask. I don't understand this. The second most popular blog on our website by views is U Values for Dummies, where we explain U values to people like ourselves and go, we don't understand this. Oh, and by the way, this bit we don't understand at all, but we know someone who can do it for us. And it gives us a number, and we kind of know where that number should sit. Yeah. 0.2 good, 0.6 not so good. Yeah. So yeah, I think some of this is about when we go back to the question, which is the stranglehold thing, was the stranglehold companies will often enforce regulation, certification, accreditation, etc., onto an industry, onto a sector, which effectively act as a paid license to trade. That locks competition out. They alternate to meetings with a spreadsheet and a whole bunch of stuff, so they've got to be right. Yeah, because who questions the spreadsheet and the data? Right? And this does not help by everybody asking for spreadsheets and data all the time as well. So some of this has got, it's part of the wrap, isn't it? It's not just the whole thing. We can all look at the data. We can ask knowledgeable people who understand it. What should I do here? But as Mark was pointing out, by the time it gets beyond the remit of an architect or a building designer and it gets into the real world, then people make their decisions based on a whole bunch of other criteria. And they're not these. That's why the stranglehold companies have a stranglehold, because they are better and bigger at messaging.
On that, quite a dramatic statement. We've
apologies.
It's 1 o'clock, and Jeff's going to disappear any second.
If Jeff does, I'm actually okay for. My colleague came in earlier on. I'm okay for another 5 minutes. If there are any questions, I would be delighted to think there are, but not so presumptuous to think that there definitely would be. But if there are, I would be happy to stay for another 5 minutes. I don't know what Mark's situation is.
I do have a hard stop, so I will go now. Fine, just thank you very much. Worth mentioning as well that the new issue of the magazine is out. It's on it's online now, and it's at the printers. So anybody who's interested, go to Passive House Plus, English spelling of Passive House, Passive House Plus, PLUS.IE or .co.uk if you want to wrap yourself in a Union Jack. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
Cheers. No, it's Richard's just made a point online that in terms of data, Revit, it may get to the point where you input embodied carbon calculations into Revit, but yeah, we can continue the conversation, but I mean, it's probably is a good time to end now, just because people are used to ending at 1 o'clock. Well, the recording will make available. No, I really appreciate both of you guys. Oh, are you still on? Are you on mute, Mark? No, you're not on mute.
If you can hear me,
I can hear you now. Yeah.
I mean, I've got one little example which was sort of looking to come through, and it's a real life example, probably of architect at work, or in fact in this case not at work. But I met up with a roofer who was starting a new company in Bath. He came out of another roofing company. Is doing incredibly well. I see his sign everywhere now. But I did an initial project for him on listed buildings in Bath, where I advocated the use of a natural breathable Pavatex types material into the roof to create the breathable. Because one of the problems with a solid wall stone building in Bath is the moisture within the building and breathability and all the rest of it with the roof there. And he basically said, I'm sorry, I can't get this material. I can see you're very good at listed building work, but and there was a job potential there. Basically, we agreed to part term because he will not consider the use of what is a better material for doing a better job in a listed building. And I see his sign everywhere in Bath, and I know for sure that company will be just filling the place with Celotex and everything else into a situation that's wrong. This is where this whole thing to do with what's available locally, that local education, getting to understand, getting the message out there for people to understand, what it is they're doing. He doesn't care. He just sells a roof for a product to a client who probably doesn't care either. And yet, on a listed building in Bath, installation of the roof is actually the one area you can make a difference, because you can have a great deal of difficulty on the heavily decorated walls or the fireplace walls or anything else on that building downstairs. But that's where we that's where we need the difference, and where builder merchant selling the stuff needs to be, so that that company and that guy will be doing a better job, and probably doing it without an architect as well. But that's a little point. I don't know if you guys got any answers to that, but it's a problem.
Well, yeah, it's what we do day in day out. Just going back to Simon's point about the labelling. I mean, I ideally, in terms of an indication, I mean, I would look at food labelling rather than say EPCs, or look at energy labelling on appliances, or energy labelling effectively on houses.
Yeah.
But I think that kind of calorific, the calorific sort of nutrition type guidance on building products would be a very welcome approach. And I think it would definitely help. I mean, if people started seeing building materials on site with everything was bright red with an F against it, or an E in terms of its carbon performance, that would definitely help. So I mean, but I think whatever regime you put in place, there will be pitfalls. But the one thing I would say is that this is about constantly nudging people within your sphere of influence towards somewhere that's demonstrably better. This isn't trying to get them on board with what you're doing because you're right and they haven't got it right. It's about demonstrable change. And I think that again, another eco-merchant principle is that we nudge. We constantly nudge the whole time. Introduce you to this, show you that, share experiences. And the other thing which is really important is this: it's networking events. Anybody on this call who wants to ring me up and have a chat, talk to us about business, whatever, ask me a question, fine, please do so. The more people we talk to, and the broader we take this out, the more change that we are likely to become real. And then the last thing I would say on the stranglehold incumbents is, I'll give you an example, because it doesn't name any names, it names products. We were dealing with a very large distributor of carpet underlay and flooring underlay products. And we introduced them to a product made by a wood fiber manufacturer, which was a carpet underlay. And it happened to have better acoustic properties, better thermal properties, although they measure carpet underlay in TOG rather than giving it a thermal measure, a U value or a lambda value. And it was a really, really nice underlay, and it was cheaper than most of the foam equivalents that they were selling. And it utterly bombed. And when I actually managed to talk to someone who worked for that distributor after they'd left and subsequently gone to and work for another distributor, what we found was that the proverbial cat had been put amongst the pigeons. And this company was thinking, well, this wood fiber product is about 0.5% of our sales. And now I've got the 99.5%ers coming back to me saying, if you don't take this damn thing off the market, we're going to look at another distributor. So their incumbent supply chain prejudiced and thwarted innovation, even though the distributor was thinking, this is brilliant. Yeah, we've got a fantastic, and it was enormously popular. But it's now we're about to bring it back next year, actually, and do it through our own distribution, because we're unencumbered by other manufacturers of carpet and flooring underlay. But that's exactly the kind of thing that happens in real life in construction.
Shocking.
That's what happens, you know.
Yeah.
So, were there any more questions, or because I'm literally right up against it now and it's my turn?
We're done for questions, thank you. There's been some chat between the guys as well, just sort of answering other questions amongst themselves, so that's cool. But no, like I say, I will put your details on. Everyone's going to access your details.
Just go to eco-merchant,
yeah, but I'll share the
email us and say, can Will, this one's for Will, and I'll get it. But that'd be lovely to engage with some of some of your audience, Simon.
Brilliant. No, fantastic. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for taking
no problem.
Have a good afternoon, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.